OG Rose, and today we're going to be talking about risk, relevance, and ritual, inspired by author Gordon and Jason James, two dear friends of mine that I speak with regularly. We were having a discussion, and it came out of that, and basically we're going to be talking about three principles, kind of three heuristics that I think can be helpful for answering a question: how do I create meaning in my life? The meaning crisis is quite prevalent, and though there are lots of pieces in OG Rose that describe the meaning crisis, rephrasing the question not, what do I find meaningful, but instead, what do I find beautiful? Because actually asking that question can be kind of more useful because it's more phenomenological, more practice, whereas the question of meaning can be propositional knowledge, or if, you go to a dictionary to get meaning, and usually when people are asking questions about meaning and finding meaning in life, they're asking questions about a way of living. And beauty, kind of asking, what do I find beautiful, is a useful tool. What am I willing to what am I willing to do even if I never receive acknowledgement for? That can be a useful question. What am I willing to sacrifice for? That can be a useful question. And indeed, it would seem like the question of finding meaning is tied to an entire toolbox of inquiries and practices we can go about asking. Out of the conversation, we ended up talking about risk, relevance, and ritual as kind of a trio of a Trinitarian heuristic that one can use, which is to say that we find meaning, or life can feel meaningful, if we take a risk regularly that we find relevant. So if we regularly take a risk for something that we believe matters, thus there's risk, thus there's ritual, thus there's relevance. So to ask those three questions, am I doing anything in my life that requires all three of those, or that partakes in all three of those? Am I doing something that is risky? Am I doing something that I believe is relevant? And am I doing something ritualistically, meaning regularly? Do I have habits and practices toward that risk that I believe is relevant? So, when I talk about regularity, you could also talk about risk, relevance, and regularity. But I like ritual because ritual is kind of deeper. And I think it kind of speaks to this need humans have for ritual. There does seem to be some truth to the notion of homo religioso. And so humans seem to need ritual. So I like the word ritual. And I think ritual gets into habits and things like that. John Vervaeke, inspired by, say, Monty Ponti, some of the phenomenologists, phenomenology of perception, he'll talk about, and obviously the meaning crisis is coined by Mr. Vervaeke, but he'll talk about how we tend to feel like we know something when we have a grip on it. Like, take this laptop, for example. I probably know 1% of everything there is to know about this laptop, and yet I don't wonder about the other 99%. I feel like I actually know the laptop, which is kind of funny, right? Because I really don't know the laptop at all, and yet I genuinely believe I do know it. I believe I do know this laptop. And so it's interesting because we tend to position, Ponti will talk about how we're constantly moving our bodies, say, to get at the right location to see a painting. We're constantly moving around to position ourselves to comprehend, perceive, and apprehend the world around us in the right way. And that means our positioning, our bodily position, influences knowledge. So likewise, in a similar way, we tend to, when we encounter something we don't know, we tend to use it or experiment with it until we get to the place where we can use it for us. It works for us. And once we get to that point where it works for us, we basically believe we know it, that we have a hold on it. Now, this can be bad. Heidegger talks about the problem with, when everything becomes invisible to us because we just use it. But at the same time, there's a bit of necessity of things becoming invisible to us, or us eventually having a cutoff point where we say, okay, I know the laptop, because otherwise every object kind of has an infinity to it. We could always know more about it. It would be difficult to function. So there's pros and cons to the fact that human beings tend to know by quote-unquote grip, getting a grip on things, as opposed to full knowledge, of which then whatever grip we get on objects, we necessarily feel as if that came from the object, not from our use of it, so that it is authoritative. So likewise, I don't experience the laptop as something I know in terms of my use of it. I experience my knowledge of the laptop in terms of what the laptop is, as if I really do know it. But that is kind of a necessary feeling so that my assessment of the laptop feels authoritative. It feels actual, and thus that's another kind of thing that occurs where I naturally experience my grip on things as full knowledge of those things, and that's the way we operate. When it comes to knowing Daniel, though, Daniel is metaphysical. There is no odd. Yes, there's the body that I am in, but if I get a grip on how to use my body or how my body works, that's not the same as getting a grip on Daniel. Daniel does not entail direct facticity to kind of help me figure out what I need to know or do to get a grip on Daniel. A hammer, in its very shape, in its very objectness, kind of gives to me what I need to do to get a grip on it, but not Daniel. And so this is part of the problem. One of the reasons why it's hard to get meaning is because we have to decide what are the metaphysical heuristics according to which we will get a grip on Daniel. And that's not given to me by Daniel. So how do I get a grip on myself is something I have to decide on. And we all have to decide on that. And if I don't get a grip on myself, well then it will be very difficult to live a meaningful life because I won't know how to use myself or how to carry myself in the world so that my life feels meaningful. So then the question becomes, what are the heuristics according to which I can get a grip on Daniel so that Daniel can feel like he lives a meaningful life? Is it memory? Is it, say, fun experiences? Is it status? There's many metaphysical heuristics and principles according to which Daniel could live and experiment with to try to get a grip on Daniel. But I believe that risk, relevance, and ritual are the three according to which we should try to get a grip on ourselves. And notice these are not just these are not just notions of propositional knowledge. Risk is something you do, relevance is something you stand up for, and ritual is something you participate in. These are not just things you know, and that's one of the reasons they can provide meaning, because meaning has to be full body. It can't just be propositional. And why I think it is these three is because if we never take risk, then we never know if we're courageous, if we're willing to put ourselves out for something, and if we're willing to rise to the occasion. If we don't do something that's relevant, well then we feel like we wasted our life because we didn't do anything relevant. And if we don't do anything regularly, well then, yeah, we might get a feeling of meaning for, say, a few weeks, but then if we don't do it again after a month, then we go back to feeling like our life doesn't have meaning and we're bored. So we have to do all three of these. I was talking with Raymond recently, and we talked about eros, logos, and thymos, and how in the kind of classical notion, the human soul needed all three of those. You needed the rational mind, you needed the consumptive, pleasurable, aesthetic, sexual side of the human being, eros, but you also needed thymos, and thymos is a very forgotten concept, which is spiritedness, which is courage, which is rising to the occasion. For me, we can associate thymos with risk. We can associate logos with relevance because you have to discern that something is relevant to you. And we can take ritual as eros because that is the regular consumption, the regular participation in. And so for me, these three align well with the tripartite soul, the classical notion of the human soul. And it does seem that there's something about human beings that needs all three. But of course, it's critical to note that you need all three. If you have thymos without, say, logos, then thymos is unleashed and you have a kind of brutist, violent society. If you have eros, though, without logos, then you have sexuality and consumption without any way to control it. But if you have, say, eros and logos, which I think you have in the West today, that looks like Nietzsche's Last Man. So you need the thymos. You need all three. In the same way with the Christian Trinity, the three infinites of the good, the beautiful, and the true, if you don't have all three of those, you have a disaster. If you have, say, true beauty, but it's not good, well, then it just attracts people into a facticity they don't care about, or that's evil. If you have the truth and you have goodness, but it's not beautiful, who cares? So you have to have all three. There's something about having all three that is really, really important. And so for me, to approach the question of does life have meaning, or how can I give my life meaning, there's a few questions I think that are good to ask. Am I taking a risk? What do I find relevant? And do I have regular practices? If you answer no to one of those, then that could be a reason why life doesn't feel as meaningful. And basically the big question that all that comes together for is, am I regularly practicing a risk for something I believe matters? If the answer is no, well then I think according to that question, one can go about getting a better grip on themselves. And with that grip, you can know yourself. And if you know yourself, well then you can have meaning, because you can know the thing of which is trying to live the right life, and thus know if it is or if it is not. for more by OG Rose. Please visit ogrose.com, YouTube, Anchor, Instagram, Twitter, all these things. And thank you so much for your time.